Peter. I want to introduce you to our host tonight, Nick and Emily.
Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nick, Emily.
I'm going to duck in front of the camera in a second and say hi to you. Thank you for doing this, everybody. This is Peter Ramsey. He's an Oscar winner and a multiple Emmy winner, a brilliant animator, a brilliant writer, a brilliant director. More than all of that, he's an incredible human being.
Please don't.
Ridiculously good person.
Please don't stop.
Yeah, thanks for saying that because I have sheaves of paper here. Yeah, it's just my great pleasure. I don't even actually remember how we met, but we've known each other for a little while now and taking some projects back and forth. And just one of the proudest things in my life is to be able to count Peter as a friend. So everybody, we just watched Spider-Verse. Here's Peter Ramsey. Let's hear for him. All right.
Which one did you guys watch? The Across or Into?
Into.
Oh, okay, the good one.
Every time I watch this movie, I'm like, wow, this is insane.
No,
Yeah, thank you so much for meeting us. I'm Emily. I don't know if you got that, and this is Nick. Yeah, we're so glad to have you here. This is a part of our Student Filmmaking Club, and we're just really excited to talk to you.
Okay, fantastic. Hey, Emily, I'm not hearing you that clearly. So I don't know if you just have a little tiny voice or...
I do not have a tiny voice. Our friend Lyndon's going to help with the mics while I keep talking. So our first question for you is, you began your career in art pre-production as a storyboard artist, and as your career has progressed, how has your view of filmmaking changed, and what have you learned?
Yeah, well, it's been interesting. I mean, I came in really green and young, really not knowing that much other than what I'd been able to teach myself. I didn't go to film school. I took a few film classes, so I had kind of a rudimentary knowledge of just the craft of filmmaking. I knew the basics, but I didn't have a deep, a deep wealth of filmmaking knowledge of my own. I had read a lot, and I had learned a lot about film history. And of course, just devouring movies whenever I could and trying to analyze them as much as possible on my own. So I'd say for me, it's just been a constant learning experience, just deepening my understanding of what actually does go into making a film and telling a story cinematically. I think that's been, for me, probably that idea. What is cinematic storytelling? Kind of the continual deeper understanding of that has been the biggest change personally for me in the way I understand film and go about it. There's been lots of other things about, what it takes to collaborate creatively with other people. That's been a huge one. You don't quite have to understand that as much when you're focusing on a particular craft. Like, when I was a storyboard artist working on a movie, obviously it was a very different thing than it is directing one. But, a lot of people will say, well, you're just coming up with the shots and you're drawing them and you're making them up and you're basically kind of directing already on paper, right? And it's sort of, well, yes and no. There's a lot of other parts of the discipline that you really have to, you don't have to be an expert at everything, but you have to have some kind of understanding and some kind of grasp of all the other things it takes to make a movie and to work creatively with other people who are, experts in their craft. So I think understanding the breadth of what you have to know and the idea of, what is it to tell a story on film? What do you really need to do? Those have been kind of the biggest things. And it's not like I know it now, but it's a constant evolution. You're always learning.
Yeah. And like you said, you began as a storyboard artist. What are some skills and lessons you learned in that time that now help you as a director? And then now that you're directing, how do you communicate with your pre-production team while making those storyboards now?
Yeah. A lot of what I learned was economy in storytelling. You start learning, partially because you're drawing these things and it's like, am I going to draw 40 or 400? I've got to narrow down the scope of what I'm trying to communicate. and you start understanding, because you can draw anything. You don't have any limitations at all when you're just there, and it's just you and the piece of paper or the iPad or whatever it is you're drawing on. But you have to start understanding, well, there's only so many hours that the crew has to shoot in a day. If you're giving them a scene that's got 80 gazillion different angles and there's not too much decision making or focus going on there behind what you're doing, it's not going to work. So that you start to learn, well, just in practical terms, can what I'm presenting these people actually be shot? Are these shots that you can get with that human beings can get with a camera and a crew? How many of those setups am I saying that you really need to tell this story clearly? Am I picking the best ones? Am I do I know enough about blocking and staging that I can combine what might be 5 different camera setups into one shot and communicate? Let the actors do the communicating instead of cutting here, trying to do everything with just one tool. So those kinds of things, I didn't know them at all when I first started storyboarding. I was clueless, and to this day I'm amazed that directors didn't just bounce me out of the office for coming with some amateurish nonsense. But you kind of learn it as you go along, and you see. I remember I'd see a director with with my storyboards, and oh wow, great drawings. This is great. This is great. This is great. And I'd see them. The times I'd be on set, I'd see them actually doing it, and I'd go, oh well, that's not what I drew. That's like a And you start learning. Well, yeah, they couldn't go right to left because the sun was over there, and they needed it backlit, so they flipped it around, so now it's left to right, and the set wasn't quite like this, and then the DP had this cool idea where they could do all 3 of these shots in one, and the actor had an idea to just do this with a look, so you don't have to do this and that, and there's just all sorts of things that you start to learn about what it really is to tell a story on film. So have no idea what the original question was, to be totally honest with you. But that story in the course of me, learning about storyboarding and learning more about film, those are some of the things that really were really kind of made me evolve and really think more deeply about what I was doing. Because you can fool when you're good at something, you can fool yourself into thinking that's the only answer. Oh wow, I draw really well, so that must mean I'm a good storyboard artist. That must mean I, could be a really good director because wow, look at that frame I just drew. That's amazing. But it's a limited understanding of what it actually takes.
Yep.
That's so interesting. That's fun to hear. How do you select filmmakers to work with and you build your team now that you've, in the last decade or so, come into these more leadership heavy roles in filmmaking? What do you look for in young filmmakers who you want to work with?
Oh, wow. Gee whiz. People who have a strong sense of story. That's kind of, you always want people whose primary focus is going to be story and who understand story. So, and you can get a feel from it when you're talking to someone. Usually most people at a certain level, if they're working consistently, that means other people think they know what they're doing, and of that understanding that story is the primary thing. So that you have somebody to back you up, when you're falling down in terms of storytelling and the needs of the story. That's always the primary thing. It's just over and over again, I just go back to this idea that the main thing you need as a director is to understand what the story is and at any given moment how you're telling that particular element of the story. That's the most important thing. So that number one is as far as working with other people, that's it. I think somebody who's excited about the material, somebody who sees the same potential in the material in the story as you do. somebody who's people who have enthusiasm and passion for what they do, and who again, whose first loyalty, when people's first loyalty is to the story rather than their own ego, including me, I think that's when you get the best results. And that's how you ensure everyone's going in the same direction. So you're just all kind of pulling each other along instead of things turning into like a competition between, I'm smarter than you, I've got better taste, I've got this, I've got that. If you can, ahead of time all agree that, this is a story we're going to tell and this is how we want to tell it, and we're all doing the same thing, it gets you off on a much better foot. So those kinds of things are the things in my mind when I'm talking to other people that potentially I could be working with.
Yeah. We actually have a question from the audience now. Would Sophie like to come up? Is she here?
Hi.
Hello.
So let me find my question.
It's also right here if you'd like to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, coming into this, I didn't actually know that you were also an animator, which makes me even more invested in the answer. So-
I kind of.
Oh,
Not
mostly storyboard?
I'll explain. You can ask.
Okay,
but I'll-
for sure. So, how did you work with art directors and animators to make sure color and also shape language were some of the main storytellers in the movie?
Yeah. Just to get the animator thing out of the way, I've never really professionally animated anything in my life. So it's kind of, everybody assumes, oh wow, Spider-Verse and whatever else, blah blah blah. But no, I never have. But the skill that I brought to animation was as a story artist. And before I ever got involved in animation, I was a live action storyboard artist. So that was kind of my pathway in. And yeah, I got into animation almost as a weird kind of fluke. And I just happened to land in a place where my particular skill set fit well with what was going on in animation at the time, the 3D CG animation over at DreamWorks. So that's, just to get that out of the way. But in terms of working with the team to, in terms of production design and the visuals of the film, that's like that's one of the in animation, that's one of your main jobs, is to work with the design team to decide, well, how are we going to visually tell this story? What are the elements that we have to work with, light, color, the basic modeling design, the what's the aesthetic of the film, what's the level of stylization, all that stuff. You're having intense discussions like it's a huge part of it. Just as an example, on Spider-Verse, going into Spider-Verse, we knew that the idea from the very beginning that it was going to be inspired by comics, that we were going to really use a lot of inspiration from comic books, was there on the table, and that we wanted it to have a more graphic feel than a lot of the CG movies that had been, coming out at the time, which is, the more Pixar look, the kind of rounded, polished, softer, we were kind of like, yes, that every movie looks like that. It's kind of been perfected. What can we do that's different? And taking inspiration from comic books, we decided, well, if we go for a more graphic look, something that's got, where you can see ink lines, where you can get a kind of a little bit of a harder edged feel without sacrificing, life or fluidity or any of that. How do we do it? So once we had made the decision, the big question was, how do we do it? How do we do that visually? And that took us really the first year and a half that I was involved with that movie as a director. It was so much of it, we were working on the story, but it took us a year and a half to evolve to the look that we ended up with. And even during the making of the movie, we were still inventing new stuff. Our production designer, Justin Thompson, who's actually one of the directors on Across the Spider-Verse. He was a genius, brilliant. And working with Justin, you know, there were Bob Persichetti and myself mainly directing. We kind of like churned through just idea after idea of, you know, what does the city look like? What does light look like? What do people look like walking around in the daytime? What does one of our characters look like with sunlight on his face? It took us a year to figure that out. So it's a long, extremely detailed process where you're trying different kinds of ideas. You're trying to one of the big things about our look is the degree to which we kind of logicked it out. You know, it was a thing where, well, we want this graphic look, we want this comic book look. What can we pull from comics to help us? How do they show light and shadow in comics as opposed to most animated movies? And that led to stuff like the dot patterns. That led to things like seeing the ink lines on characters' faces to convey more emotion. That led to the way we modeled the characters. When we modeled the 3D characters, we decided, well, we want to have more graphic, pronounced shadows on their faces. So if we add extra planes, sharper planes to their faces, the light is going to interact with them in a different way. You're going to get light that looks more like what a comic book artist would draw in a comic book. So it was things like that. There was just going from that one idea of we're going to be more inspired by comic books that inspired countless decisions that determined the look.
That's really cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have another audience question actually from Jack Cable, if he is in here. No? Great, never mind.
He's here.
Way in the back.
Hi, Peter.
Hey.
You kind of already answered the first half of this question, but I was wondering, on Spider-Verse, where it's so important for the project to have that consistent look and feel throughout the whole thing, how do you go about, I mean, A, creating that, but also once you have an idea for how it needs to look and feel, when you're working with such a massive team, how do you kind of disseminate that and make sure that the whole team is aware of that and able to execute that vision to the best of their ability?
Yeah, it's all about organization. It's really organized. You know, when you're what do you end up doing in an animated movie? You do a lot of concept paintings, look dev paintings, and determining the look of the picture in a really definitive, organized way. There's a lot of style guides. So the art director and the production designer, they'll create along with the concept artists style guides that tell you this is what it looks like when light meets shadow in our movie. This is how we handle this problem. This is how we handle metal. This is how we handle water. This is how we, you know, you name it. You can go on and on and on. But all these things have to be thought through and determined so that there's not going to be anybody, you know, there's never going to be an artist sitting there going like, I think I'll do it like this, you know, and it's something totally different that doesn't match at all. So all those things are thought through and determined like kind of case by case. And, you know, there's always things that pop up down the road or stuff that doesn't get figured out till later. But the basics, you know, the vast majority of things get thought through at an early stage so that there's some kind of detailed roadmap that anybody can follow. And there's a lot of quality control. So, you know, there's a lot of stages in the process where things are getting checked and double checked to make sure that nothing substandard is getting through. You know, we would do tons of digital reviews, digital dailies, where we as directors would look at, you know, what was coming out of, you know, animation or the production design or VFX, and we'd critique it. We'd go, you know, more of this, less of that. That's too dark. That's too light. Oh, I don't like the size of this, or, you know, and then we would just have to work together to adjust it and change it. But it's a lot of work. I mean, as much, you know, you sit and you look at those movies, and as much as you can go, God, you know, wow, how much work does it take to do every single one of these shots? And it's like, yeah, it takes all that work. So it's a lot.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jack. And building off of that process of those constant iterations you guys do, be it in a voice performance or a character design or in a style guide, when do you say this design is as good as it can be, or this take is as good as it can be, and when do you just move on and kind of, because you can tweak things forever, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. But I think there's a law of diminishing returns, and there's just the reality of the schedule. There's like it's a big deal when you're deadlines. I mean, and I will say, working with Phil Lord and Chris Miller, it's like deadlines. What are those? What are those two were like the ones that were like, there's no such thing as deadlines, and we're like, what? um, but you're really striving to like get things done, so you can continue on with other work. You've got to. There's things you can't animate something that hasn't been modeled, so you got to get the models right. So there's a lot of steps to the process that you have to complete before you go on. So it's once production starts, it's a moving train, and it just does not stop. So everybody kind of like has to be on their best behavior and really, really hit their marks. And that said, you don't want to let anything go before it's ready. It all kind of depends on your ability to move quickly. Do you have a producer who's going to be flexible enough to work with you on the schedule, to give you more time to do this if you need it. There's a lot of elements that kind of have to be in play. But you usually know when something's right. When there's typically a moment in all these different whether it's the look of an environment, whether it's the animation style for a character, whether it's a color scheme or a costume. Typically, when it's right, everybody knows it, and you feel it come to life there. Yeah. So there is a little bit of intuitive. There's an intuitive element to the process.
Gotcha.
So Peter, you're an old pro now. You've won a show full of awards. You've run through all sorts of stuff. What would you wish that someone had told you when you were 20 years old? Just sort of trying to figure it out.
Ooh, when I was 20 years old. Oh my God, what would I have told myself? A lot of things. Actually, when I was 20 years old, I would have told myself it's possible and you can do it. Because when I was 20, I didn't even know you could do this for a living. I had no idea. I had no clue. I mean, I knew that people did it, but for me at that age, it was still like some far off, like, wow, only what do you have to go to Harvard or something? What? Yeah, I just didn't know how you did it. And I definitely didn't know, somebody like me, it was like, that was like being an astronaut or something. So that would have been thing number one. 20 years old, I would have said, oh God, it's funny. I would have said a lot of things actually, and kind of ended up doing, because I was unknowingly, I was drawing from a pretty young age, and I was like really like working on that skill to sort of, I didn't know what I was going to do with it exactly. For a long time I thought I'd be an illustrator or a comic book artist, or I didn't know, and it wasn't until later I combined that with this budding interest I had in filmmaking to become a storyboard artist. But I think I would have told myself to really think about what's. I think I would have told myself to take seriously the idea that there's something in the things that you love, that if you're really feeling a real pull towards something, don't hesitate and invest in that in whatever way possible. And I was kind of lucky. That is kind of what I did. So I'm trying to think of some advice that I would never have thought of back then. It's a little tough. I will say one thing. I'll say don't be afraid to don't be afraid to start with the thing you really want to do. Back then, my whole master plan was, okay, I don't. I had decided before I was ever a storyboard artist, I decided I'm going to be a director. And it's like, okay, I don't have any money to make films. I don't have a camera. I don't have this. I don't have, it's like, and at that time, kids, there were, none of these. There was no Final Cut on your Mac. There was no Mac. There was like I didn't have like the technical ability at my fingertips like all of you guys do now to produce something for a very small amount of money, which was close to professional quality. So for me, there was a huge chasm between where I was and where I wanted to get to. And I came up with this thing. Well, I'll be a storyboard artist and I'll meet people and I'll climb the ladder and and there were great things about that, because I did climb the ladder and I did meet people and learned a lot. But the negative about it is, if you get addicted to this mentality of climbing the ladder and kind of like, going step by step instead of finding a way to go right for the thing that you really love, you can get lost in that climbing the ladder thing, especially if you're trying to make a living, and then trying to rent an apartment or, start a family. And suddenly, you're on that ladder kind of, you've got to cling on for dear life because you don't want things to change. So that can be kind of tough. But now I'd say, wow, if you want to write, throw yourself into it, make that your thing. You're already a writer. If you might be a bad writer, just write. If you want to direct, start making films now with whatever you have at hand. You might be a terrible director, but you're going to get better. Your first few films are going to be bad, but you're still a director. And then the first time you run into somebody who asks you what you want to do, and you can tell them, I'm a director, that's what you are because you're doing it. So if I could go back in time, I think I would tell myself, you know what, find a way. And I did, make a few little films, but I wasn't as like do or die about it as I think I could have been earlier.
So last one for me. I know I'm a huge fan of Francis Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula, and you were one of the artists that he brought in to work on that film with him. Can you talk just a little bit about that experience and what you took away from it? And then I'm going to hand it back to you.
That was like a dream, man. That was like it was incredible. I ended up being on it for a year, which, for storyboarding on a movie, that's a long time. It was a wonderful experience because it was, I had grown up kind of idolizing Francis, from his movies, The Godfather, Apocalypse Now. I mean, these are some of the movies that convinced me that ordinary people didn't make movies. That it was just like, how can anybody have made that? It's so perfect. It's so monumental. It's so, they're so astounding. It's like they just fell out of the sky somehow. I couldn't understand it. And learning a little bit more about him and what an artist he was and a showman and just larger than life character. And I lucked into working on that movie. A friend of mine who had been storyboarding on it, and this was like 2 years into me being a storyboarder, so I was still very new. And a friend of mine had been on it, and I think he got the opportunity to work on Jurassic Park. So he was leaving, and he recommended me to the production, and went in, got the job, couldn't believe it. And Francis was, I didn't meet him for the first 2 weeks, so I was kind of quaking in my boots when he finally did show up, and I met him, but he was the sweetest guy, and it was like, the way he runs his productions, it's like the circus or something. It's like, come on and join us. We're going on an adventure. And it was just this amazing thing. And he saw I was young and green, but I was working really hard and I had a lot of passion for what I was doing. And he like ate that up, kind of took me under his wing, and it was an amazing experience. It was just incredible. There's a book about him, a new book about him called The Path to Paradise. And if you read that book, I came along like 10 years after the events of that book, but I could, when I read the book, I was like, I was feeling the echoes of all of that. I so like, that's so much like what I experienced, even if it was, a little after the fact, but it was a magical time. And it really, really, really taught me a lot about thinking creatively, about storytelling, about ambition, about tons of things. So it was an amazing time.
That's awesome. You moved from director to executive producer on the Spider-Verse movies. What made you want to step back from the director's chair and move on to other projects? And did your experience change working on the same project or same characters, but from a different angle and a different role?
Yeah, I kind of stepped away because them things is hard. I mean, it's really like, I'm telling you, those movies are, you can ask anybody involved with them. Everybody's, there's some of the proudest work they've ever done, but it's a really, really tough process. Part of it is, just those things are so complex and complicated. There's so many characters, so many storylines, so much, and that coupled with the amount of just new ideas and things, including the look and the feel, new things that have to be invented that haven't really been done before in animation, and then it's just the high bar of execution. The level that you want all this stuff to be executed at was really high. Phil Lord and Chris Miller, they're brilliant guys. They're also very they come out of writing for TV. And one thing about TV, particularly TV comedy writers, is their whole thing is iterating and trying to top things. So it's constantly this restless kind of like, but can it be better? Can it be better? Let's try this. What about this? What about this? And that's like, that combined with animation is like, it's like crazy, man. It's crazy town. So they actually, when we were working on Into, I think we were maybe 6 months out from completing the film. And 6 months out, we were like, can we complete this film? We really didn't know, because it had been so crazy. And we were like, way past all our deadlines. And everybody was trashed, man. It was, so they were already talking about a sequel, like before we finished the first one. And they asked me to, we want you to come back for the sequel. And I was kind of like, hell no, I never want to hear the word Spider-Man again in my life. That's how hard it was. That's how hard it was. It was probably a lot like a pregnant woman having triplets. That's like, you ask her if she wants to have another baby before she's had those first three, and she's gonna throw a can at your head or something. That's literally how it was. And the other thing for me was, it was also like, that's 3 years of your life, on the shorter side, on an animated film of that size. So for me, it was sort of, do I want to turn right around and commit to doing this again now? And I was like, God, I just don't think I have it. I don't think I have it in me. And I also think if this movie comes out as good as I think it's going to be, I might have opportunities to do other things I wanted to do for a long time, like some of my own stuff, rather than being part of a team. So that was sort of the selfish part of my, my reasoning. But yeah, so I was like, well, and we, talked about it a lot, and finally, they were like, well, what, could you stay on and exec produce? And I was like, yes, because I don't want to leave the family. I'd love to stick around and contribute any way I could and be a part of this. And so that's kind of what ended up happening. And as far as, the difference between the two, executive producer, it kind of depends on what you, that's a title that depends on what you bring to the table. You see executive producer names all over the place. Some of those are guys who were involved with the financing on the first, on the movie. Some of them are people, you'll see a lot of generally, if you had something to do with the first movie of a franchise, like you directed it or you wrote it, a lot of times you'll end up being almost by default an executive producer on the movies that come after because you helped create the original material. And how much work is involved with that? I didn't do a whole lot on Across the Spider-Verse. I mean, I read drafts of the script and gave notes. I saw cuts of the film and gave notes. I saw some story pitches, but I wasn't in there day to day slugging it out with those guys because they have 3 directors and they have Phil and Chris. So there's plenty of cooks in the kitchen. They didn't really need more, but it's a thing. Just if you need me, just show the bat signal. I'll be there, and I'll do whatever is needed for as much time as it takes.
Yeah. And some of those new projects are in Star Wars, both of which were awesome, on Mandalorian and Ahsoka. But how do you maintain creative consistency throughout a series with different directors? Because you're jumping into Mandalorian after there's already been 2.5 seasons. How do you have your own creative voice that's unique while also kind of integrating into the rest of a series?
Yeah, I mean that's a thing. When you're in a situation like that, at least me, I don't like going in with the illusion that suddenly it's going to be the Peter Ramsey Star Wars, because it's not. It's fitting into an established aesthetic, an established storyline. So it's not like I was going to come in and show them how I would do Star Wars or something. Like I was going to change everything around. So I kind of like put that ego notion aside, and it was just kind of like, oh, how can I service what's going on in the story? What's the best way that I can think of to tell this story that works for the aesthetic of the show? Yeah. And so it's much more about that than it is, because at the end of the day, you can come in and do whatever you want as director on these shows, but after the day you call your final cut, you're gonna work on your director's cut with the editors, but after that, it's still got months to go down the road for them to put in the VFX, and then they're gonna get all the shows in. They're gonna look at the whole season, and they're gonna, you know what? In Peter's episode, we do this, this, and this, but actually looking at the whole thing, it doesn't make sense to have it there. So let's cut it out of there. Let's, we're gonna do something. We have something like it in episode 7. So blah blah blah. So there's changes that go on. That are made by, Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, who are the producers and the showrunners. They've got an eye on the big picture. As a director on a series like that, you're only looking at your episode. So it's a different sort of mindset, and it's a different function that you have, as opposed to if it was me with my own movie, I'd be the king, and I could I would mold that thing according to my own what I wanted out of it, but it's a different set of responsibilities, and it's just a different function that you fulfill when you're directing on a show like that. All that said, I had an amazing time. I had a great time. Those guys, when it came to just storytelling decisions, like what shot here, how are you going to stage this, that was all me. I got to tell it my way. So it was I never felt like I was being erased or anything like that. It was just fun. It was just 100% fun for me.
Yeah. So on your Star Wars projects, you're shooting a little bit on the volume, and then on Lost Ollie, which congratulations for the Emmy wins. It's amazing.
Thank you.
You're working with ILM again. How do you communicate with your VFX department on a production? With the volume, how does pre-production look with that technology? And then how does VFX change the workflow for you?
Yeah, it's really the nice thing about VFX now is it's sophisticated enough that it's really intuitive. The other thing for me is the benefit that I have of my all the time I've spent in storyboarding and in animation, that pre-visualizing things is just, it's a habit for me.
Yeah.
I don't have any anxiety about coming up with a shot off the top of my head, or telling somebody how I imagine this space battle to go, or this, this fight, whatever it is. I've done it enough that I don't have, I'm not so intimidated by the idea that I'm describing something that doesn't exist yet, or that I have to imagine things that don't exist yet. I just kind of like, I imagine what I want to see, and I'm confident those guys can do it. That's the other thing. I'm not worrying about whether, wow, can these guys pull this off? Can they handle it? It's ILM. They can, come on, they can do this before breakfast. So a lot of it then is just being clear, and again, going back to the idea of storytelling. What story am I trying to tell, so that these shots are not just pretty, or that they're not just stuff whizzing around, that they have a focus, and they have there's an idea behind them that the VFX team can understand, so they know what the purpose of the shot is. Because everything has to have a reason to exist, or it's got to fulfill a function in telling part of the story. So you and the team, you just have to be clear about what that is, and that's going to give the shot or the scene or whatever it is some sort of solidity, and why you're doing what you're doing. So when you see it on the screen, you understand how it feels, and the impact of it, because it's fulfilling the function that it's supposed to. So and in a practical sense, again, like on Lost Ollie, I did tons of storyboards to show those guys, this is what I had in mind for when he runs along the shelf in the toy store and tries to leap out the door, or run from the dog, or X, Y, and Z. I could storyboard stuff out, so they could tell the animators could tell exactly, what the idea was. And also on Lost Dolly, a lot of what we did was very, it was a pretty low budget little show, and we'd be shooting, and we'd have our little puppet stand-ins when we were shooting our live action plate shots, which the animated characters would later be comped into. So we'd have we would do one camera pass where we'd just walk the little puppet through the shot, and I would be narrating it like an old silent movie director, and we would kind of time it out that way. And then we would repeat the camera moves with the same narration and the same thing. And yeah, months and months later, ILM would stick the little CG figures in there, and somehow it worked. So it was it's all about having enough confidence to be able to pre-visualize these things, and have faith that it's going to work, I think.
Yeah.
And being clear.
So the first time I saw Spider-Verse, Peter, I cried a lot. My son was looking at me while I was doing that, and there's a moment where Miles reveals his costume for the first time, and you see that spray paint's his voice. So I want to ask that question awkwardly now. This is about as the creator of color, what is your responsibility, and what have the challenges been for you, and what's the extent of the responsibility that you feel to representation? We've had some of these conversations offline, but I was wondering if you could share a little bit of that, the challenges, and also the feelings of responsibility for showing something as beautiful as that in the film.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, for me, beyond, the idea of representation for me, it's not just getting somebody up on screen and you can say, "Oh, look, Spider-Man's black now." It really is showing the full humanity of people, no matter who they are. But we're in a time where historically, some people just haven't gotten the same sort of chance to participate in something like the idea of a superhero, So it's like, when you have that opportunity, you really want to make sure that you're presenting these characters as full human beings. Like, our big thing with Spider-Verse, with Miles, was that we knew, wow, the wider audience, the wider movie audience, doesn't know anything about this character, Miles Morales. They only know they've known Peter Parker through X number of movies, and to them, that's Spider-Man. And we're asking them to accept this whole other person, this whole other kid, as Spider-Man. And no matter who Miles, was, we would, I think we would have gone through the same thought process of like, wow, we have to make them love this guy and accept him if they're going to care about this movie. And it just happened that Miles was an Afro-Latino kid in Brooklyn, so our thing was like, well, let's make him as believable as possible and as real as possible and get into his life as much as we can so that audiences will embrace him as a person, as somebody that they understand and empathize with, and that they see in the specifics of his daily life that, oh, he's a real guy. He's not just a generic, you know, kid. He's like, oh, he's got specific things about his life that, just like I have specific things in my life, whether you're Afro-Latino or you're Chinese or, whatever you are, there are unique things in your life day to day that contribute to making you a full rounded person. So that really was the idea with Miles. And it kind of extended from everything to, the decor in his house, to him speaking Spanish with his mom, to the music that he listened to, which is the same music that's, part of the score. It's all of that was an effort to make him feel as much like a real person that you understood because you saw the detail of his life and you felt that detail, and hopefully that was going to allow you to empathize with him more, because underneath all the detail, everybody is like everybody else. You still try to sing to your favorite song and you don't know all the words, and there's all those things that everybody can relate to. And and in the end with Spider-Man, it really all went to the message of, hey, anybody can wear the mask. Underneath everybody is capable of the same heroism, of making these same sacrifices. We're all underneath, we're all connected. So that was sort of that's what underlies all of that stuff.
Awesome. We actually have an audience question now from Jesse Crone. Who wants to come up? Okay.
Hey, Jesse.
Hi.
Hey, Jason, what's up?
I was just wondering what sort of differs between directing for an animated film and voice acting compared to a live action film or TV show.
Good question. And it's weird because the answer is not all that much. The stuff that you're directing is it's still it's still behavior in a way. You're still trying to get at what the character is feeling underneath and how they express that through through what they're saying and what they're doing. I mean, obviously, if you're just directing voice, you have to find that you have to keep in mind, well, there is going to be a visual, physical performance. This actor is not going to be the one to do it. But you have to kind of modulate, well, if they do too much because they know they're not being seen and they feel like they have to, give it an extra 15% to make up for that, that's not going to work, because then it's going to be a corny, over the top performance. So you sort of have to really draw back and really focus on what's essential about this moment. What is this character? What's the emotional truth of the moment? And that really is that's the same for animation and live action, whether it's voice acting or you're with an actor in the flesh on the set. It's just, what's the emotional truth of this moment? And really beyond that, there's not a whole lot more difference that I encountered.
Well, thank you very much.
Interesting.
Hi,
Thank you,
very
Jesse.
welcome.
We have another question from Liam. Where's Liam? Gotta fight his way up here. Hold on. Beat some people up.
Let's go, Liam. Let's go. Come on. Come on.
Sorry. I'm trying to find my question and I'm stumbling. Hold on.
Do you want it? It's right here.
All right.
How
So
you doing?
when adapting characters from Into the Spider-Verse, like Miles and all the other Spider people, you're dealing with like mountains of source material, and you're also dealing with pressure from other people saying what you need to do for it to be correct, but also a unique portrayal. I was wondering if there was if this affected your choices and your process in casting for those characters.
Not a whole lot. With Spider-Verse, the first one in particular, the second one too. I mean, a lot of these characters just weren't as well known as other characters have been in the, if you go back to when Into the Spider-Verse came out, nobody, as far as moviegoers went, at least, hardly anybody knew who Spider-Gwen was, or the Prowler, or the King. It was like we kind of had free reign to go with our own interpretations, but at the same time, we were comic book fans. We knew the characters from the comic book, so we weren't really starting total from ground zero, not knowing anything about it. The job was just kind of like, oh, what's gonna really bring these characters to life in the most fun and believable way. What seems to encapsulate, what actor's voice would really make this character resonate in a way that you understood what this character was about, and so it was really much more about that. I said same thing for the second movie too, even though by that time, of course, a lot more people understood. Oh, the multiverse. Oh, Miles Morales. Oh yeah, we know all that stuff. We know all about it. We're experts. Blah 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 blah. But it still would have to excite us in the room, as a group. It's you're going a lot on your gut and on intuition, and it's also you've got you're building an ensemble, you're building a group of characters, so they kind of have to, their energy kind of has to be right, bouncing off each other. So a lot of times you're taking into account, well, we could cast this person, but they sound a lot like, their vibe is a lot like this other person, so what if we had somebody more different to kind of, might create more dramatic opportunities if this character was, had a voice more like this that was more different from that one. So there's a lot of factors that you take into account, but we didn't have a lot of pressure like, oh my God, the fans are, there were probably some obvious things. Well, you don't want to let the fans down and have this character played by somebody who was totally inappropriate. But, beyond that, it really was, a lot of calls based on intuition and unexpected ideas. I think I remember somebody thought of Nicolas Cage for Spider Noir, and everybody was like, "Oh my God, I never thought of that, but it would be incredible," And the idea of for a long time, Doc Ock was a man, and Bob Persichetti, my fellow director, was like, "What if it's a woman? It's a different universe. Why don't we just make it a woman?" And we were like, wow, that would be pretty amazing, and that sends you on, who could we cast there? And Catherine Hahn seemed like the ideal, perfect person to do that part. Sorry about that. So it's a mix of things, but really, I think mostly what it comes down to is hearing the idea and going, oh, that could be really cool.
Cool. Thank you.
Gotcha. Thank you.
We have another question from Matthew Kahn about the scripts. Is he here? Nice. Let's see.
Hey, Mr. Ramsey, nice to talk with you. My name is Matthew. I had a question about the sort of vision of the script. You had two writers who primarily write comedy movies, and there's a lot of great comedy moments in this movie. But I'm a little curious about how clearly the vision for the film came through when you first read the script, and what you contributed, how you nurtured, how you executed the vision for the film.
Yeah, it's really interesting with Spider-Verse. It's you see, like, if you get the final script that's available online, that's the end product of like 3 years of changes and rewriting and rejigging. And so it wasn't like, it wasn't Phil and Rodney kind of like writing out a script and, back in 2016 and going, here you go, there's the movie. Was not that at all. It started out completely differently, and a lot of I think there was a very early, first draft I think Phil had written. It was really different from the finished movie, although it had a lot of the scenes were there. A lot of the primary relationships, although those evolved as well, and the vibe of it. The thing that movie had from the very beginning was a really clear emotional vibe that really Phil Lord kind of like really kind of nailed it early on, and it was going to be a movie about really a movie about this kid who was learning to really to persevere in the face of difficulty and discover who he was. It really was a story about Miles, and that was at the core of it was something very much like that. And so over those years, we would, in the form of script pages, storyboarded sequences, then we'd edit the storyboarded sequences into scenes. And every time we're doing that, you're changing things. Every iteration, you're changing things. And you watch the scene, and then you go, you know what? This doesn't work, but if we did that and put that there, let's go back to script pages and rewrite. And so you're constantly bouncing back and forth and evolving things and iterating, and you're incorporating ideas from all over the place. So you really don't have a finished script until the very end of the process. At least not on these movies. It's getting built in a very different organic way that's going back and forth between script pages, storyboards, editing, and it's all becomes one big jumble, and you're sort of like moving stuff around constantly. But really, that was the process. That was how it's built, and everybody's contributing ideas. I mean, early on, I think when I first came on as director, because Bob Persichetti was on first, excuse me, and I was directing another movie that fell through, and then Bob asked me to come over and if I'd do some storyboarding on Spidey since I had some time, and I came over, and I was storyboarding with Bob on the way early days for like 8-9 months, and then they asked me to come on and co-direct because the movie was big, and so we were like, Bob and I would be writing pages and let's try this and try that and try scenes and this, that, and trying to get to a version. And then Phil and Chris came back from their Star Wars movie they were on at the time. So they jumped back in with the writing, but they couldn't spend all the time on it. So Rodney Rothman came in. I mean, it was like a real kind of three-ring circus that took a while to coalesce to the point where it was like Phil and Rodney, kind of taking the baton. But that was like probably halfway into the production of the movie. And we had been like trying versions of scenes and structures and all this stuff. And it was all kind of a constant evolution that really it only started becoming clear as, when we were like well into half of our schedule. So it's I don't know if any of that made sense, but it was that's what it was like making the movie. And it was it's a if you can wrap your head around it and make peace with the fact that it's gonna just keep churning and keep changing, and that there is some control you have, but you just don't have all of it, and you're probably not going to, then you can kind of survive it. But it's a real wild ride.
Amazing. Thanks for taking my question.
Yeah, you're welcome. I hope it made sense, because I kind of got lost.
We're having just a few more questions for you because our time is almost up. But we have one more question from Kira Tomlinson. Are they still here? Mm-hmm. I love putting people on the spot like this. They don't know that I'm going to call them up, and it's just like force them to crawl to the front.
You can do it. You can do it.
Prepared.
You're all good.
Hi, it's lovely to meet you.
Oh, good to meet you.
I do have my question. Do I remember what it was?
Here, come over here more.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so my question was, what do you find is the best way to keep track of all the different characters' emotions and their
emotional developments throughout the film, and does that ever get lost a little bit, like the moral point of the story, and how do you jump back into it when you lose it?
Yeah, that was the on Into, that was the number one challenge with everything else going on in that movie. It was making sure that Miles's emotional journey never got lost. So you have to you kind of have to hammer it into your head that the story of the movie is the story of the character. It's not, you know, it's not really you know, does the bad guy blow up the collider, or does, you know, all that stuff. They're things that happen, but unless they directly impact and sort of somehow directly relate to what your character is going through emotionally, nobody's gonna care, no matter how cool it looks or how, you know, you've got to be telling the story. You know, at least in a traditional 3-act film, it's the story of a character who is going through some sort of emotional journey or evolution, and you know, whether or not they reach a new level of understanding about themselves and reach their goal of more fulfillment, blah 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 blah. But so and then so you've got to make sure that you're servicing that for your main character. In a movie like Spider-Verse, where you've got a cast of, you know, dozens of characters, for them to feel like they have a purpose in the movie, and for them to feel for you to feel like they're not just, you know, anonymous other, you know, clutter floating around and confusing the story, they've got to have stories too. So you know, they can be very simple stories, but there's got to be some idea behind them that, you know, when they pop in up in the story, they have a reason for being there, and their actions have some kind of context, so that when you know, when Spider Noir shows up, you know, you kind of understand, oh, he's doing that because this is kind of his thing, and that's going to dictate the actions that he takes in the story. You know, you know, you get a couple of funny jokes out of it because that's his thing. But there's also, you know, from the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie, there's some sort of little progression. You know, with all those characters, there's some little, you know, there's some place that they have to go. So really, it's the some kind of clarity in the emotional journeys of your characters, no matter how small, really helps in terms of making it all feel like one story, instead of a story with a whole lot of confusing other tangential elements going on that rob the focus of the primary storyline.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Great question.
We have tons more questions, but we unfortunately are out of time. So thank you so much for speaking with us. We love talking to you.
I don't mind staying longer if you guys stay longer, but maybe class is over. I don't know.
We'll do one more.
Well, we have one more that's very, very short. Is there a niche filmmaker that you recommend film students to study?
Oh, niche. God, there's so many filmmakers I recommend to film students. That's the thing. I mean, that's wow. I always go back to the big classic guys. I mean, you know, the old classics. I mean, you can't go wrong studying guys like Akira Kurosawa or Alfred Hitchcock, David Lean, Orson Welles, Coppola, Spielberg. I mean, you cannot go wrong studying those guys. Peter Weir is a filmmaker I love. So look up any of his movies. You won't be sorry. Yeah, any of the, you know, it may sound kind of boring, but a lot of the great filmmakers who are considered great, and you kind of like, oh yeah, well, you know, Vertigo, whatever, blah blah blah. Usually there's a reason these things are considered great. So it's like, you know, get over yourself and look at some of these old movies, and you really will learn a lot about what cinema storytelling really is about. So yeah, and I don't know, beyond that, like niche, like, oh man, I don't know. Walter, who's good? See, Walter's way more of an expert than I am at
Cassavetes.
Yeah, there you go. John Cassavetes. Perfect. Bullseye, absolute bullseye. Intimate, real, grounded storytelling about real people. That's your guy. And from there you can go anywhere. If you put a John Cassavetes movie in the middle of a, of a Christopher Nolan movie, you'd probably have the greatest Christopher Nolan movie ever made. So there you go.
Awesome, thank you. Would you be okay if we come up to the screen and take a photo with you?
Yeah, sure.
Hey, I want to give a big plug too for Peter's Rise of the Guardians in 2012. I watch that movie every year with my family. My
As you
kids are mostly
should.
grown now. My daughter, when she came home from school, she wasn't asking for Elf or Miracle on 34th Street. She's like, when are we watching Guardians?
Yeah, thank you for bringing us Rise of the Guardians. We're huge fans.
I was gonna come over and tell them all to watch Rise of the Guardians.
Rise of the Guardians on 3.
Rise of the Guardians!
Peter, thank you.
Hey, Walter. Oh, my pleasure, man. My
All
pleasure.
right, I love you, man. I'll talk to you soon.
I hope so. Take care, man. Bye, guys.
Amazing, thank you.
Take it easy. See ya.